is your quick lesson for day 10, the quadratic formula and discriminant. Okay, so let's start with our warm-up. Which method would be the easiest to use in order to solve the following quadratic equations? You do not need to solve each. You're just going to name the easiest method. So the methods, basically the methods that we did yesterday. Remember the methods yesterday or today in class if you're watching it. If you're watching it on Tuesday night here, which you should be. The methods we used was just regular factoring. We used the square root method, and then we used completing the square. So if I were to look at A, B, and C, I'm going to look for the square root method right off the bat. I can tell you right now, A and C, you cannot do the square root method because they have an x squared and an x. But you can do the square root method here. Alright? Because again, it has that x minus 5, and the whole thing is squared, so then you could easily divide by 3 and square root to isolate that x minus 5. To get rid of that squared, isolate the x by just adding the 5 then. And then, let's see, for factoring, let's look to see. So, do I have two numbers that multiply to be 7, those same numbers that also add to be negative 6? So, 7 and 1 are my factors, right, for 7. And they have to both be positive or both be negative. So, 7 times 1 and 7 times, or negative 7 and negative 1, they don't add to be negative 6. I probably would do complete the square then for this one. And the A value is 1, so it's a real easy one to do complete the square on. Remember I told you the A value has to be 1 for complete the square. So remember on the one we did earlier, in day 9 notes, you had to divide out a 3 on that one example. Okay, and then this one, C, what multiplies to be negative 4 that adds to be negative 3. So the factors of negative 4 would be 4 and 1. And that works because if 4 is a negative and 1 is a positive, when I multiply them, they become negative 4. And when I add them, they're negative 3. So that is, I could solve that by factoring. Okay? Now, that's just a quick review of the ones we did. Now let's do 3x squared minus 4x plus 2 and talk about that. Okay. When I look at this one, if I looked at those 3 methods above, I always try factoring first. So I see grouping here. And I would say, okay, 3 times 2 is 6 and negative 4. And I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to be positive 6 that add to be negative 4. And there are no numbers, kids. There's no numbers. So I can't factor. Can't do that. I can't do the square root method because I don't have just a binomial squared or just an x squared. I have an x here. I can't do that. I can't do the square root method. What about complete the square? Well, I have to divide out a 3. And as you can see, there are nasty fractions here. So I do not want to do the complete the square on that. Don't want to use that method for this problem. So let's talk about another method. And I'm not writing it down, but I explained to you just now. I'm not going to write the whole thing down. Can't factor. Excuse me. I can't complete the square, and I can't do the square root method. But there is another method, and it's the quadratic formula. And no, I'm not going to sing it to you. I know there are some teachers that have. You don't have to memorize it. It is on the reference sheet. And I have referred to it in class a couple times. This is my favorite method to use when I'm in a pinch and I just have to go and do a quick factor. It works on every different type of quadratic, whether it has a b value or not. If it doesn't have a c value, it works. It works on all of them. It works on ones that are hard to factor. It works on ones that you can't do complete the square on. It works on all of them. Okay, so the one here, solve 3x squared minus 4x plus 2 equals 0. Use the quadratic formula and state the nature of this. So let's do it. A is 3, B is negative 4, and C is 2. And I know that because, remember, this is the format. Right? That is the format for a quadratic standard form, right? The A is the value, the coefficient with the x squared, the B is the coefficient with the x, and the C is the constant. Okay, so we're going to just plug and chug. So I have a negative 4 going in, and there's a negative here in the equation, so it's going to be two negatives. You don't have to write it, but I'm going to. There's my plus minus. My A is 3, and my C is 2. Now, be very careful. When you put this in your calculator, okay, listen carefully. When you put this in your calculator, I want you to do it in steps. I want you to leave this as a 4. And then in your calculator, do only what's inside the radical. Do not do a radical on your calculator. Just do parentheses negative 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times 2. And you're going to get negative 8. All right. So leave it just like that, and then we're going to do 2 times 3 is 6. And then you're going to simplify from here. Now, there's some steps for simplifying we got to talk about. So when you go to simplify, you're going to simplify that square root. So a 4 comes out of there and an I. So it becomes 2I radical 2. That's what I want to see on your paper. Then there's something called the triangle I use to help me with these. When I have any reducing where I have a radical, a binomial on the numerator, and a monomial on the bottom, I call it the triangle, okay? And what I do is I look at these tips of the triangle, the vertices of the triangle. So the 4, the 2, and the 6 never go inside the radical. You cannot simplify inside the radical with something on the outside of a radical. So that's why I kind of do the triangle. So take the 4, the 2, and the 6. The 4, the 2, and the 6, and say, all right, is there any factor I can take out of all those? I can take the number 2 out. So I divide them all by 2. If I can't take it out of all of them, I am not going to take it out of them. Okay? All right. Now, next step with this. When you leave your answers, we're going to separate them further. And we've got that. All right. So what I did was I separated them 2 separate fractions. Okay. See how that works? All right. Okay. Flip it. All right. I'm going to try a couple more here. I'm actually going to let you try this one. I'm going to look for it when I come back on Thursday. I'm going to do B with you. All right, we're going to take x squared equals negative 2x minus 2. In order to do the quadratic formula, you still have to set equal to 0. So I'm going to add the 2x, and I'm going to add the 2 equals 0. And I'm going to say A is 1, B is 2, C is 2. And I'm going to do my quadratic formula. Negative B, negative 2, plus or minus B squared minus 4A times C. And I've got 1 here. And I'm going to give you a minute. I'm going to run and grab a Kleenex, actually. You guys are going to try and simplify that real quick for me. I'll be right back. hand back. Hopefully you've simplified it. See how you did. I got the square root of -4 there. And I got 2. Now I'm going to show you another way. Instead of doing the triangle like I did the last one, I'm going to separate them originally. Now when I separate this one, this is 2i, right? Because this comes out as a 2i. And then if you don't want to do the triangle piece, you can do that. You can separate it into just 2 separate fractions and then divide. -2 divided by 2 is -1, plus or minus. 2i divided by 2 is just I. And there is your solutions. Okay? Alright. So, now, the directions on the other page said to state the nature of the roots. So I was kind of holding off to do a couple of these before. So let's go back to the front page here. Alright, and I want you to remember to state the nature of the roots. Now remember, there's a couple of them. There's a couple different scenarios. There's 2 real unequal solutions. There's 2 real equal solutions, and then there's complex. So we've got 2 complex for this one. Okay. And then for this one, we have 2 complex again. Now, you're going to have problems possibly on the regions that will ask you just to tell me the nature of the roots. And there's a trick in which you don't have to actually solve for the roots to find the nature of the roots. And it's called the discriminant. Okay? So read this box here. It says there's a special part of the quadratic formula that will tell us the nature of the roots without having to do the entire formula. Can you identify that part? And that is b squared minus 4ac. Now, why is that? Because inside the square root, okay, so in here, looking up here, which is what I'm looking at right there, if that inside the square root's a negative, I automatically know it's going to be complex, okay? If it is anything other than a negative, then it's a real solution, right? If they're positive, if it's a positive square root, then there's a real solution there, okay? And how do I know if it's 0 or if it's if it's 2 real equal roots? I'm gonna explain that down here. That would be if the discriminant is 0. But let me do this. So it says when using the discriminant to determine the nature of this, we're going to summarize those 3 scenarios again. So we've got 2 real unequal roots. And that is when the b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0. The other scenario that we talked about yesterday, or today earlier, was 2 real equal roots. And this is if the b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0. And I'll explain that. And then the last one would be 2 complex roots. And that is if the b squared minus 4ac is less than 0, or like you're going to think of it as a negative. This would be if it's a positive, and this one would be if it's a 0. Okay. Now I've already done this with you, but we're going to put it in our notes again. It says how many x-intercepts would each of the cases above have if the quadratic was set equal to y. So basically, they're saying if it was like 2 real and equal, we did this yesterday. I made you graph it yesterday. It would have 2 roots like that. It would have 2 x-intercepts. 2 roots, 2 x-intercepts. So 2 x-intercepts. if it was 0, if they were two real equal roots, or the discriminant was 0, it would have one root, which is one x-intercept. And if they were two complex roots, it wouldn't cross the x-axis at all. No x-intercepts, okay? I've already done that with you, though. Now, I know the part that's probably tricky is this one, that c squared minus 4ac, where it is equal to 0. Like, I know this one's probably, like, you're not quite sure about why it's 0. So let's talk about it here. Here we're going to do computing using the discriminant here. So it says compute the value of the discriminant of the quadratic equation in each part below. Then use the value of the discriminant to predict the nature of the roots. All right, so if I said to you, I wanted you to tell me what the nature of the roots are, right? We're going to take our discriminant. And check this out. This actually is going to be the one that it's set equal to 0, isn't it? Now, how is that? Well, if I were to actually do the whole quadratic here, inside the square root would be 0, and it would be that, right? Well, if you think about it, because the square root is 0, there is only really one answer, right? Negative 2 plus 0 divided by 2, and negative 2 minus 0 divided by 2 is still negative 1. So that's just to show you that when the discriminant is 0, right, these are both negative 1. That's your two real equal solutions. There's two solutions, but they're equal to each other, right? Remember that? And that's where it hits it once. Okay, I'm going to have you do B with the discriminant, which means you're going to have to distribute the 2, and you're going to have to set it equal to 0. And I'm out. I'm out for the night. So be good tomorrow in class. Make sure that you have, when you pick up your packet in class tomorrow, you work on it. You spend the period. It's not short, so you're going to need the 40 minutes. No screwing off. Make sure that you can work in small groups, but make sure that you're not just sitting there socializing and copying waiting for someone to do it. Certainly not going to get you anywhere. And I'm so putting this on the checkpoint. You're going to have a checkpoint on Thursday, and you're going to, on that checkpoint on Thursday is going to be problems from here. So make sure that you know what you're doing. There will be an answer key on my website. Once I post this video, I'm going to post the answer key on my website of the assignment that you're doing in class tomorrow. So you can check it. I don't want you to copy. Well, you're not going to be able to. I'm just going to put the answers on it actually anyway. So I'm not going to show you all the work. You have to show all your work. So you'll be able to check and see if you're doing them right. Okay? All right. Have a good night. I'm out. Peace.